All right, adventure jogger fans, my number one goal is to help you log as many miles as possible for as long as possible. To help you do this, I've put together a very simple, short, corrective exercise routine that is designed to improve how your muscles are moving. This is basically to help get the left side of your body to work as close to the right side of your body as possible. Because what do we runners do? We jump from one leg to the next, and we do this thousands of times a day. So, that being said, we've got to make sure that how we jump from the left side to the right side is as close to symmetrical as possible. That way, we can evenly distribute the work, force, and tension between the left and the right sides. Improving how your muscles move will also help reduce those repetitive overuse injuries that I'm sure we're all kind of familiar with and used to. So just doing this routine can help improve the way that you're moving and feeling. However, doing this routine to extract information from it as, well, how are these muscle groups working? What are the weak spots? What are the areas that don't really feel like they're moving well? And where are there severe imbalances? Learning what to do with this information is what's going to set you up long term. This is what I specialize in, and this is what I help people in. So if you want to learn more about how to really push the envelope of function so you can continue doing what you love doing for as long as possible, then please reach out to me on any of my channels or at painacademy.net. I'll see you soon. Straighten your left leg on the ground and lift your right leg off of the ground. You're going to interlace your hands together right behind the hamstring underneath the knee. From here, we're going to do clockwise rotations for 1 minute with your right ankle. As we rotate this foot, let's make sure the shin stays parallel to the ground and we're taking our time. You might notice that you're skipping certain angles and ranges of motion. So I want you to go slow. Whatever your natural speed is, go half as fast as that. And then go half as fast as whatever that half speed was. The goal is to rediscover function with dozens of muscles in your toes, arch, and front of your shin. So take your time for the minute of clockwise rotation that we're gonna do. As the right foot's rotating, let's also make sure that that left leg is still pointed straight up towards the ceiling. That way we don't have any rotation starting to come in with this exercise. Most of the time people will use speed to avoid function. So again, really pay attention to how fast that ankle's moving. That was about a minute, so let's switch directions now. Let's go counterclockwise with the same ankle. It's also really important to understand if you have any TMJ or teeth grinding issues, what your jaw and tongue position is doing in this exercise. When the ankle, knee, and hip are not stable, we will actually clench down the jaw in an effort to stabilize our pelvis. So make sure to keep breathing, relax your face, relax your jaw, and just rediscover motion, 1 repetition and 1 circle at a time. Ideally, these should be simple, right? We're just asking muscles to move the bones in the foot. If these are hard for you, we have to ask the question of, well, what is really helping us walk? What's helping us run if these muscles aren't even able to move the foot well without being under load? The whole idea with this is we want this to get easier over time. Now, let's do point and flexes with the same ankle. So point the foot forward, then pull it back. Point it forwards and pull it back. This is that action that we want to have happen when we walk. It's that rolling toe-off action with each step. And you'll find that the easier this exercise gets, the smoother and more natural walking and running is going to feel for you. And that's good for the right leg. Let's switch sides. Now straighten your right leg out on the ground and lift your left leg up. Interlace your hands together behind your left hamstring. And we're going to start off with counterclockwise circles on this side for a minute. And even though it's early on this left side, you should probably already have a sense of how this foot is working different than the other foot. Ideally, we want them to be the same, but if there is years of imbalance, compensation, dysfunction, and asymmetry, chances are you're going to notice one side already has a different level of range of motion, one side has a different level of cadence and speed to it, and one side definitely has a different level of endurance. So pay attention to which one feels like it's fatiguing. Over time, you should start to notice both feet can be used the same way. So be sure to keep the straight leg still pointed up towards the ceiling. Good, about 10 more seconds of this rotation. The shoulders are relaxed and the jaw is relaxed. Now, let's go the opposite way. So let's go clockwise. And again, whatever speed you're choosing, go half as fast as that, and then half as fast as that. I don't care if you get 10 circles in throughout the entire duration. I just want that foot to start moving again. And also don't be afraid to get those toes involved too. So when you get that rolling action, get those toes by pointing, flexing, and curling with you. The whole idea here is to rediscover function throughout the entire foot. Hence the name of the exercise. Good, nice and slow, we're breathing. And also make sure that the leg is straight. Notice how the shin is parallel and it's not moving around at all. You might try to move your ankle left, right, higher or lower to make it easier to work. We want to keep everything on really nice angles today. Perfect. Now let's go ahead and point and flex. Pull the toes back and point them forward. And again, don't be afraid to get those toes involved. Let's see those toes point and curl with you and then pull back. Wonderful. 1 rep at a time. And just to be really redundant here, we're working on the strength and the function of the arches, the shins, and the calf muscles. These are the muscles that are responsible for stabilizing our upper body. So it's really important that we work on our foundation, the base of our support, to help us get us through the rest of the day. And that's good. Let's start out by lying on your back with both feet up on the wall. Your hips and knees are going to be at a 90-degree position. Now, once we're here, let's make sure that both feet are in line with each other. One foot's not higher than the other, and that both shins are parallel to the floor. Once you're in position, before we do anything, I want you to take your hands and I want you to grab the sides of your pelvis and feel around for where your pelvis is. It's this bony landmark right on the side of your waist. Once you have an idea of where your pelvis is, take your thumbs and kind of poke around to get a sense of where the bottom of your rib cage is. What we want to try to do here is, if you notice one side of your pelvis is closer to your ribs, we're going to just gently try to level that. So when we do our hip motion, it's with as level of a pelvis as possible. So once you've got a good reference of where your pelvis is, and it's okay if that's hard for you, practice makes perfect, and you might have to do that a couple times to get a reference of where it is. Once we can make sure that the hips and the pelvis are level, now we're going to start the exercise. Bring both knees touching inward together, and then let both knees move away from each other. As both knees move away from each other, we're going to roll, basically hinge onto the outer edge of the foot while keeping the foot straight. Now, let's bring the knees back together to touch in the middle. And that's 1 rep. I'm going to put 4 minutes on the clock, and we're going to do this for 4 minutes, back and forth, nice and slow. The goal with this exercise is not speed. The goal is function. And the intention of this, as you notice by now, your pelvis is relatively staying in place. It's on the floor, which means that your pelvis is not moving around. So when you get this knees going wider motion, it's truly the rotation happening at the hip socket. So we are working on how your hip rotates within your pelvis right now. And we're going carefully, nice and slow. As the knees move outward, let's make sure that the heels aren't coming in. So why don't you look at your heels right now? We want to make sure that we're really truly staying on the outer edge of the foot as the knees come back together again. And we're going slow to make sure that they're both moving in unison simultaneously. One's not moving faster than the other. And once you get that cadence down, use this exercise to test, are both hips able to rotate together? Do they feel the same? Does one feel like it's lagging or shaking or a little jittery? We're testing how both hips work and function together. You can leave your hands by your waist unless you're really certain that that pelvis is not hiking up or moving around at all. Let's bring your arms down to your side, palms face up. There's nothing your upper body has to do here. This is just about teaching rotation at your hip joint. On a corrective exercise level, what we're also trying to go after here is how the hip flexors and the glutes are working together. The hip flexor attaches right onto the inner upper hip bone and crosses over your pelvis and attaches to the bottom part of your spine, your lumbar vertebrae. So because the hip flexor is attached to your thigh bone and your spine, when you move this thigh bone, the spine should gently move with it, just a little bit. When your knees move out, that lower back should almost just faintly lift off the floor. Still staying on the floor, but you should feel the pressure ease. And then when the knees come back together, that spine should almost naturally kind of press as that pelvis rolls a little bit more posterior and backwards. So every motion that we're doing, going out and coming in, what we're really doing is getting this gentle little rocking motion of the pelvis and the spine on a horizontal axis. And this is going to put some much needed mobility back into the hips, pelvis, and spine. It's going to help reestablish blood flow, circulation, nutrient delivery. Basically anything you can think of that your body needs is going to happen with a simple, delicate exercise like this. But it might not feel delicate for you. If this is the first time that your hips have had to truly rotate without any other joints helping out, this might be a tremendous level of work. You might feel your shins on fire trying to work because you normally would rather rotate through your foot and not your hip. You might find one shoulder is trying to clench up and help out. This is just how imbalance and compensation is showing up, and that will change over time. That was 4 minutes, so we're going to move on. Start this exercise off by grabbing the side of your pelvis. What I want to make sure is that pelvis doesn't move around just for the sake of this exercise. The whole goal is to keep the pelvis level and neutral and in the same position while we rediscover hip function. So from here, holding onto your pelvis, let's lift your left leg off the ground and place it on top of the right thigh. And press that left knee away from you so you can feel that outer left hip start to work. And from here, lift the right leg off of the ground. We're going to hold this for a minute. As this right leg is off the ground, the ankle is going to be in line with the knee, and you're pulling the toes back towards you, just like this. And let's remember to relax those shoulders. We don't want to start curling and using our shoulders. The whole idea here is to teach the right hip flexor how to stabilize as the left hip is externally rotating. The goal is to not make this be so hard to where we need to bring our shoulders in to help. But notice if your shoulders are trying to help. This is such a simple way to see how when the hips stop functioning, how the shoulders have to chime in, or maybe we stop breathing, or maybe we really engage our core to do this. This is about the right hip and left hip being able to work together. You've got about 10 more seconds. It's going to be really important that this right leg that is elevated right now, the shin is parallel to the floor. So make sure that that foot's not trying to raise up higher or drop down. And that was about a minute. So now let's bring the right foot down to the ground and we're going to switch sides. Same thing, keep holding that pelvis. We want to make sure it doesn't move around at all. Press the right knee away from you. And now let's lift the left leg off the ground. and we're gonna stay here for another minute. Again, friendly reminder to breathe and relax the upper body. Pay attention to if one side just innately feels stronger for you, or if one hip feels tighter for you. This is just how imbalance and asymmetry have shown up within your hips. And this is a really great exercise because one hip is having to mobilize. In this example, her right hip is having to become mobile and rotate, and the left hip is having to become strong and stabilize. So this is a great way to bring balance back to your hip and pelvic function. And also, friendly reminder, once you make sure the shoulders are relaxed, this left leg, the shin should be parallel to the ground. Make sure that ankle isn't trying to move into any different position. You might find if the hip doesn't like to work here or has a hard time working here, this ankle is going to move to the left or to the right. That's you trying to rotate the hip just to stabilize it. This is why we want to keep everything in a really nice, aligned, neutral position. Great. Go ahead and bring your leg back down to the ground. Now, today we started off with one leg on top of the other. Tomorrow, you're going to switch that. So every time you do this exercise, it's not always starting off with the left leg crossed over the right leg. Tomorrow, you're going to start off with the right leg crossed over the left. Remember, the whole goal is balance and symmetry. So we don't want to always train and mobilize and stabilize the same side first. We're going to flip back and forth every time you do this. In the triangle position, widen your feet a little bit wider than shoulder width apart while still keeping the feet pointed straight ahead. So if you look down at your feet, the outer edge of your foot should be what's pointing forward. So why don't you slightly point the feet in a little bit? Perfect. From here, nice and slow, we're going to allow both knees to move to the ground to the left. And when they do this, your right pelvis is going to come up off the ground and the lower back's going to arch. Now using both hips, bring your knees back up to the middle and now drop them down the opposite way to the floor to the right. Good. And using both hips again, come up to the middle. We're going to be doing this for about 2 to 3 minutes here. Back and forth, nice and slow. Now, notice how when your knees drop down to the right hip has to externally rotate, the left hip has to internally rotate, and your pelvis naturally moves to help this happen. This is your hip and pelvic rhythm that should exist naturally. And that's what this exercise does. We are trying to move and rotate the hips and reestablish that the pelvis should also rotate with that. If there is an imbalance in how either one of your hips or how your pelvis, or lower back for this matter, rotates, you're going to notice that your experience moving to the left is different than your experience rotating to the right. So take your time and really scout out how does it feel moving to the left versus how does it feel moving to the right. Range of motion is not important to me. What's important is that you find a comfortable way to do this. If you can, the direction that you're moving towards, that knee should be able to drop down to the ground, but only when we have really great hip function, so we don't need to force that. The hip that is internally rotating, so right now in this example, it's her right hip, that knee is never really going to go down to the ground. It's always going to have some space on it. So again, ground is not the objective. The objective is to resynchronize how the hips, pelvis, and spine move together. If you notice symptoms or discomfort moving to one side, then just stop just shy of before you feel those symptoms and treat the other side the same way. Meaning, if you've got symptoms moving to the left and you're limited moving to the left, but you can go to the right all the way down to the ground, I want both sides to match function. So if you can only go one way a couple inches, go the other way only a couple inches. And as we continue to do this exercise, make sure the feet aren't starting to creep and point outwards. So maybe on the next rep, bring your knees back up to the middle and just check to make sure that those feet are pointed straight. Great. and then begin the next rep. And the feet being straight ensures that we are not trying to rotate through the foot or the shin at all, which means rotation is only happening at the hip joint. And that's what we want, is for the hip, the pelvis, and the spine to rotate, not the shins and the feet to rotate with everything. Most people will find that if their hips, pelvis, and spine don't really rotate that well, that's why the foot starts pointing outwards, to help make up for the lack of movement happening up here. And because of the importance of this, that's why we're just going really slow, 1 rep at a time. Okay, that's about 3.5 minutes, which is pretty great for this exercise. If it feels good and you're getting great relief from this, please feel free to continue it. If not, let's move on to the next thing. Now let's lie on your back and begin to move your pelvis. This exercise is about getting your pelvis to move around your hips, as opposed to a lot of other exercises that are about getting your hips to move within your pelvis. So really slowly, why don't you go ahead and place your hands on your pelvis. And what we're gonna do from here is gently roll our pelvis forward. The lower back is gonna gently arch. And then we're gonna roll our pelvis backward, and the lower back is gonna flatten. And we're doing this nice and slow. I don't care how high or low you can go. We're just looking at getting the pelvis to start rocking around a horizontal axis again. Now, if this is your first time doing this, or if you're really early on in restoring function, what you're probably going to notice is that your lower back is tipping your pelvis forward and your abs are rolling your pelvis back. This is what happens when you lose function to your hips. Your core and your back have to hijack motion just for your pelvis to move. So what we want to do is we want to change this. When you roll your pelvis back, your glutes, your butt muscles should roll that pelvis back. When you roll that pelvis forward, your hip flexors should roll that pelvis forward. So a proper pelvic tilt is the glutes and then the hip flexors rocking that pelvis forward and backward. Yes, the abs are going to help a little bit to roll you back. Yes, the lower back is going to help you a little bit to roll you forward, but they aren't the primary drivers of the pelvis changing positions. It's the glutes and the hip flexors. Those are the primary muscles that should control and manipulate the position of your pelvis. So if you have a hard time even finding out what that feels like, and if these muscles are difficult to discover, that should probably explain why your pelvis is in the position it's in, because your abs and your lower back have now had to take on the full responsibility of moving your pelvis. Another great cue, so when the back is flat, think about if you were to just lift your feet off the ground, just an inch. Those are the hip flexor muscles that should roll your pelvis forward. So think about whatever muscles that would lift your legs off the ground. That's what should tip the pelvis forward, and your lower back should arch as a byproduct of the hip flexors working. Great, that's it. Let's grab 2 solid objects that are of equal height. I've got 2 foam blocks. You can use 2 stacks of books or a shoebox at home. And once these 2 objects are down on the floor by your sides, go ahead and lay face down. And you're gonna prop both arms up on these blocks. If I'm standing above you, I'm gonna see elbow to elbow as a straight line across your back. So we're gonna move this arm here. Perfect. That way there is a straight line here. Now with the feet, let's have your big toes touch and your heels are gonna open up and drop down to the side. So think of the whole leg being internally rotated and then relaxing in this position. You can let your wrists just kind of dangle forwards off of the block, just like that. And forehead is gonna be on the ground. And here we are gonna stay for 6 minutes together. There's 2 strategies that we can take. If you think of what maybe a surfer's posture would be, which is the shoulders are really pulled back and the chest is popping forward, then what I want you to do is just relax everything in this position, and you're gonna allow the shoulders to separate. If you feel like you're the opposite, maybe like a desk worker's posture where the shoulders are continually hunched, shoulder blades are separated and rounded forward. What I want you to then do is gently pull the shoulder blades back together. Think of the shoulder blades coming back together and sliding back down towards your hips. So it's not a come back together and elevate towards the head. It's back and down. And we're going to stay here and breathe. I want you to think about if I was there right now, I would put my hand right on your lower back, and I'd want you to breathe right into my hand. Every breath, that spine should rise, and every exhale, spine should fall. And each breath is going to create this rising and falling spinal, pelvic, and hip change that we're going to reap the benefit from over the next 6 minutes. One of my favorite things about this position is it doesn't allow any rotation to happen. So by now you've probably heard a lot about rotation and how our shoulders rotate, or our upper body might rotate clockwise or counterclockwise when our hips lose proper function. The reason why our arms are propped up on these blocks is so the arms can support and hold your body. If they're equal size, you're not going to be able to throw one side of your body forward or rotate your rib cage to one way. These blocks are going to hold you in a symmetrical state. They're going to hold both shoulders in the same position. Both shoulder blades are going to have to stay in the same position, especially if you're actively pulling them back. And while we are unwinding the upper body position, your legs are internally rotated. This big toes touching, heels falling away from each other is going to take the rotation out of the shins. It's going to internally rotate both femurs, both thigh bones, which lengthens the hip flexor. So not only are we getting a hip flexor release, we're doing so while repositioning your upper body. It's hard to say if this is more for your shoulders or if it's more for your hips, but it's definitely for both. Now, I've got a big nose, so it's kind of hard to do this one laying face down for this long. So you might find it advantageous to maybe kind of turn your head to the right, let your right ear touch the ground. Maybe we stay there for a minute, and then we then turn our head to the other direction for another minute, and we maybe do that a little back and forth. But eventually, I do want your head to be able to be face down like this. Another great way to understand why there might actually be so much pressure with your face right now is if your head is used to being forward and in front of your shoulders, well, this floor is going to push that head back into position with your shoulders, right? Because right now your ankles, knees, hips, pelvis, shoulders, and head, they're all in a horizontal line. We're basically laying properly how we would want the body to be positioned when we're standing. So if you're used to a forward pushed head position, that floor is not going to let you push that head forward. It's actually going to push you back. So you might notice the neck tight because you're trying to just hold it and resist it. So take a couple deep breaths. There's nothing for your neck to do in this position but to be supported by the floor. If you've chosen those shoulder blades to be actively pulled back, I want you to feel whether or not both shoulders are working together. If you've decided to just let the shoulders separate and relax because the shoulders are too back in the first place, then feel are both shoulders able to relax or not. This is a great exercise if you're feeling tension in your back. If we were to time lapse over the next 6 minutes, we would see so much motion in the ribs and the lower spine every time you take a breath because your belly can't push forward, right? We're laying face down. So your spine has to rise and fall. In a way, you're using each breath as a very literal way to massage the muscles, the paraspinal muscles running all the way up and down your spine. One more minute. also see if you can pay attention to, do both sides of your body feel like they're on the ground in the same way? You might feel one side of your chest pressing harder than the other. That's a rotated rib cage, and that'll go away over time. You might feel one front thigh or front of your right pelvis pressing harder. Again, that's pelvic rotation. That will go away the more your body rebalances. Now, we're coming up on 6 minutes. Please feel free to stay here if it feels good. Just hit pause on the video. You can stay here for up to, I'd suggest, another 3 to 6 minutes, and then move on to the next exercise. This next exercise, I want you to find something that you can hold on to, as it's not a balance exercise. The more firm the object you can hold on to, the more you're going to get something out of this. When you think about an ankle raise to strengthen the calf and the arch muscles, how most people approach it is by shifting the pelvis forward, and this anterior shift helps to lift the heel, but it's more of momentum lifting the heel than it is actually the strength of the arch and the calf. So we're going to hold on to something to give us a sense of balance, and from here, the whole point is to keep the pelvis vertical over the ankle. So starting off with both feet pointing forwards, without shifting my body forward, I'm going to come right up onto the balls of the feet and then come back down. I'm not using a jerky, jolty motion at all. It's nice and smooth. However fast I go up is exactly how fast I'm coming down. We don't want to take advantage of any elastic properties and start bouncing up and down. We want to keep the work really slow and focused so the soft tissue is doing the majority of the work. And we're not relying on potentially the tendons or the elastic effect helping to get us up or down. All right, now let's point our feet outward at about 45 degrees. And you should notice that the knee points with the foot, so the hip is now externally rotated. And we are going to get our calves and arch to work with an externally rotated hip on both sides. Again, nice and slow, not shifting the pelvis forward or sticking the butt back. This is about keeping everything vertically stacked. And the more vertically stacked your weight is, the harder your calves have to work, because they have to lift your entire mass upward instead of upward and forward or upward and backward. So take your time with these and feel the strength come back to the arches in the calf. Now we're going to do the opposite. We're going to go pigeon-toed. So big toes touching, heels kicked out to the side. Now I've got an internally rotated hip position, and same thing. It's important that we get the calves and the arches to work with a straight foot, externally rotated foot, and an internally rotated foot, because this ensures that the arch can work and the calf can work in all 3 different hip positions, which show up in the vast majority of movements. Even something like walking, our hips are continually changing positions by rotating in and out. And keeping the calf strong, regardless of the hip position, helps to ensure the best level of stability and function when walking or running. Now, we just did one set together. Feel free to do 1 to 2 more rounds after this until you really feel like the calves are working to your desired level of intensity. In a standing position, let's make sure both feet are pointing straight forwards. So for that, you've got 5 toes on each foot. That middle toe should point forward, meaning you're going to have just a slight pigeon toe here. Now, before we do the squat position, I want you to just kind of feel the weighting of where your weight distribution is in your feet. You want your weight evenly split between the front of the foot and the heels. And we're going to maintain that loading throughout the entire time. So once you feel like you're properly grounded in the front foot and back foot, bring your hands to shoulder height and simultaneously bend your hips and your knees together at the same time. Good. And it's not about depth. This is as low as you need to go, as long as the arms are in line with the shoulders. So lower the hands a little bit. Good. It's imperative that as we stay here for the next minute, that you don't start shifting your weight back towards the heels or starting to lean forward towards the toes. So maybe when you're in the squat position, maybe play around with that loading just a little bit to ensure that your weight is evenly distributed throughout your entire musculoskeletal system. If you want a little bit of a challenge, you can flip the palms face up. This is going to place the shoulders under an external demand, which is going to require that the hips work a little bit harder here. 30 seconds left. Even though we're in a static hold, I want you to breathe. So take a moment. Even though a lot of things are tense, I want you to find the calmest, softest way to stay in this position as your body figures out how to stabilize through the major muscle groups. 10 seconds. When done right, we should kind of feel a combination of a lot of different things doing work, not one specific part of our body. But it's okay if that's what you feel if you're just starting out or early on into this program. Go ahead and stand up. Great job.